Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Evan and Aaron Show. I'm Aaron Gordon.
And I'm Evan Casey. And tonight, guys, we have a special guest joining us. She has a unique perspective on the coronavirus and COVID-19 because of her story of dealing with that during the past couple months. You may have seen her recently sharing her story on the local news station. She actually has another story on Channel 13 coming out either tonight or tomorrow. And we're really excited about having her on this show. She also has a Facebook support group called SS COVID-19, which she'll talk a lot more about tonight. But please welcome a good friend of the podcast, Michelle Freed.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle. First of all, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your perspective. And that's kind of what I want to just jump right into. I know that you've walked this path as far as telling your story over and over again. But what we're trying to do is trying to get a personal perspective on the COVID-19 outbreak and the coronavirus in general. Could you give us an overview of like your initial symptoms and how you were instructed to deal with COVID-19?
Sure. I started feeling bad on March 15th, and I did not know what it was. Number one, because the information out at that time was pretty new, and the first thing they said was, you have to have a fever. And I didn't have one, but I started feeling discomfort in my chest and my lungs, the diaphragm area. And I was trying to get my daughter home from college, and I was anxious about what was coming. And my son, I wanted him to be safe. So I chalked it up to an anxiety attack. And I also tend to get bouts of acid reflux, and it shows itself in the diaphragm area. So I kind of went with that. I didn't have a fever. Strangely, and I'll get to this later, but strangely, because of that, I started doing like diaphragm stretches and things like that, and trying to just kind of ignore it and go on. But then the next day, I started getting a really bad headache. And then the day after that, I noticed that I was really short of breath. I tried to take a walk with my daughter, and we usually go, 2-3 miles easy. And I don't think I could make it a half a mile without gasping for air. And and then the shortness of breath was elevating. I took my temperature, and the highest it ever was 98.7. So I thought, well, surely this isn't it. So by that Thursday, so I got sick on a Sunday. By that Thursday, I made a grocery store run, and it started raining, and I kind of jogged from the store to my car, and I was completely out of breath, and I knew something was wrong. So, and let me back up and say, I was a social distancer from the very beginning. I was very aware of what was coming. And so it wasn't like I was out partying with big groups. I was very, very careful. I was using wipes wherever I went. I was, not in crowded places, at once, or with other people, touching people or anything. I was really being careful. And so, so I called the doctor, and I was able to get into a what do you call him, physician's assistant, thank you, PA. And I was convinced that it wasn't anything because I didn't have the fever. So when she asked me to describe everything, and she was like, you have it, and I asked about the fever, and she said, no, not everybody has it. And so I said, well, where can I get a test? And she it wasn't a chuckle, but it was like, you can't, there's no tests available. And so the only thing that she could tell me to do first, and back then, again, it was kind of early on, she said, you just need to rest. Don't do anything aerobic. And we're going to monitor you. And if you get to where you can't breathe when you're sitting down and you can't complete a sentence, you need to get into the ER. But they didn't want to do anything else because at that time the hospital was funneling everything through the ER. And so they didn't want to risk me exposing others or possibly being exposed more in case I didn't have it, but I was diagnosed with it. And so they gave me a Z-Pak and an albuterol inhaler. And that was about it. And it was a very, very scary moment for me because there was nothing else for me to do besides recover at home and hope that it didn't get worse. And at the time, I didn't know anybody else going through it. And so I just felt really alone. The symptoms continuously got worse. It got to where like I just felt like I was walking around with a compression bandage around my lungs all the time. The night times were the worst. And most people will tell you that because, and here's another thing. Later, I learned that you really shouldn't be laying on your back and laying down all the time because it settles in your lungs. But at that time, they weren't saying that. So I was trying to rest a lot. But in the middle of the night, there were plenty of times when I thought, is this when I need to go to the ER, and will my lungs continue functioning without help? So it was very, very scary. Then and at the time they were saying that recovery was about 2.5 weeks average. So 2.5 weeks came and went, and I was not feeling any better. In fact, about 3 weeks in, I was feeling worse. And so I called the doctor, and based on what I was experiencing and saying, they determined that I had developed pneumonia, which is a very common thing. And that was very disheartening to hear, of course. Many tears, many lonely, dark times. So then I was given a different kind of inhaler, antibiotics, prednisone. And then at that time, in that short amount of time, they were saying, you need to be up and moving. You need to exercise your lungs as much as you can without endangering yourself, because they were finding that people in the hospital who didn't move were actually worse, and that moving, as much as it might be, difficult to do, it actually helped the lungs strengthen. Which leads me back to at the beginning when I was doing diaphragm exercises. I think that kind of helped me. And the first 3 days or so, 4 days, when I didn't know I was sick, I think I was a little bit more active than I would have been if I had known. And I think that helped me in the long run too. So the pneumonia was a really big blow, but the medicine did help that. So it was kind of a relief in the same way, because I had a plan of action. I had medicine. And then at that time, the doctor said, well, I could now, at this time, testing was open to for frontline workers through Lilly. And she said, I can probably get you in a couple of weeks or so, but by then you probably won't test positive. And they were still they were still screening people. Have you been out of the country, and have you been exposed to anyone who's been confirmed that they have it? And both of those were outdated questions, because you didn't need to be out of the country, and if nobody's getting tested, then how would you possibly know? So it was a very frustrating experience. And then, so I think I'm on day 49 here, and wow. I know it's a long time.
Wow.
And I do feel much better. I have my energy back, but I'm not 100%. And I don't know when that will happen. From what I'm hearing, lung problems or who knows? But that's where I am today.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think something that I keep coming back to, and that you experienced personally as this developed, is that it doesn't seem to be following any sort of pattern. It presents differently from person to person. It's really hard to diagnose early on. And at this point, I think a lot of people are just treating anything as COVID, as they probably should. What kind of advice do you have for people who think they may be symptomatic right now, and knowing that tests are still not very widespread? What kind of advice can you give them?
Well, one thing I would, and you mentioned the Facebook group, and this is why I started it. And I started it when I was extremely sick. But I needed a network of support who understood what I was going through. So the first thing I would say is reach out to people, whether it's through the Facebook page or wherever you can find other people that experienced it, because no two people experience the same thing. And now, I think it was last week, a report came out that said often people don't have a fever. And that I felt validated, because everybody kept saying, no, you haven't had fever, so you don't have it. But reach out to a network, and here's another thing I want to say: as loving as your mates are, or your family, or your significant others, or whoever you're sheltering in place with, or whoever you're talking to, as loving as they are, it's a very long and relentless experience. And even the most loving people are going to get sick of hearing you talk about it. And I got sick of hearing myself talk about it, but it was very helpful to say, okay, well, did you experience this? Did you experience this? And it gives you some level of comfort that you're not alone, and you can compare, okay, well, what are you taking? And, where are you? Did you ever, call the doctor again? And did you get a new medicine or whatever? So I would say find a support system and know that it's going to be a very grueling experience. I keep using the word relentless. This virus just keeps coming back for more, and it's like a chameleon, and it's mentally, physically, and emotionally grueling. And the mental fatigue is incredible, and it's very hard to just, you have a day or two, and then you're going to be, back down and have another, bad day or a few days. It's like one step forward and two or sometimes three steps backward. So it's going to be a long process. It's going to be something that you've never experienced before, and you have to be patient, and you have to realize that it's going to take time, and to let your body tell you what it needs or what it's ready to do. I think that's the biggest advice I would give.
And that's a perfect segue into my next question. I was going to ask a different question, but I really wanted to dive in a little bit, Michelle, on the emotional and mental impact that this virus has on people who are experiencing it right now. We talk a lot about the physical aspect of this virus, but can you lend some insight into like what does it do to a person's psyche?
Wow. Yes. First of all, because of the level of like the knowledge of what the virus is, and because, those of us who got it or have it and are recovering from home, we're not a part of any data. We're not a part of any research. We feel incredibly invisible. And I get it because, of course, frontline workers, healthcare workers, essential workers, they're going to get the test. I get it. But at the beginning, it was incredibly, I don't even know what the word is. It was hard to even wrap my brain around the fact that sports stars could get tested, and politicians could get tested, or people with connections to doctors. But just your average people, it was incredibly frustrating. Isolating for sure. You're trying to do your best to stay away from people. You have to tell people that you're in contact with, that you had it. And that was I felt like a leper, even though I knew that it wasn't my fault. And it's like, and I've described this before, it's like you're getting punched in the face over and over and over, and you're tied to a post, and there's nothing that you can do except take the blows, because, there was no alternative unless I got so sick that I had to be hospitalized.
Yeah.
And it's just a very lonely feeling. And it's, again, you think you feel better, and then you don't. And it's just like it's like a really sick joke over and over and over again. So, and it affected people around me, I know. And it was hard to see me go through that. The psychological toll, and then you get paranoid even when you start feeling better, and every little thing that you feel, you think, oh my God, is this a second wave? Or is this something that's, am I going to go into some sort of, fit or something? Or you just don't know. And it just wears you down. It just wears you down.
Yeah, I can imagine just the constant not knowing what's next would just be brutal. There's a clamor to open up the economy, quote unquote, to go back to work. And I'm sympathetic to the notion that to a certain level that needs to happen. But I think there's a certain segment of people who, for them, it's not real. And I can only speculate, but I would have to say that they just don't see it as real because it's not impacted anyone close to them. Because I don't think you could see that happening and then say, well, we should be able to go to tattoo parlors and things of that nature, and yet we still see it happen. How do we make this real for people without them having to get sick? I mean, I don't want to see everybody in this country get sick just to make a point. How do we educate without condescending? How do we educate people and, and be sympathetic at the same time to their need to get back to work, to make money, to not, have a whole new set of problems brought on just because of this?
That's a really good question. I fight back anger a lot, and I fight back frustration. Sometimes I want to scream because, the reason why I posted on Facebook 4 different times over the stages that I was in. And I don't like, I'm active on social media, but I don't like to share a lot of really personal stuff. But the reason why I did is because I wanted to put a face with what was happening to me, because at the time I didn't know anybody else. And I had so many people say to me, text me or call me or whatever, and say, you're the first person that I know that is affected by this. And shit got real, for a lot of people. So I feel like that's kind of the way everything goes, whether it's, AIDS or, pancreatic cancer or anything.
Yeah.
You're kind of indifferent until you know somebody. But I don't know how to help people, have the curiosity and feel the responsibility to know what's going on. But I would invite someone who is, needs to go get their hair done. I mean, we're all uncomfortable. This is hard for everyone, economically, emotionally. We would all love to be out at a crowded restaurant with all of our friends tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the thing that you have to, or not you, but I hope that people will remember, is that, there seems to be a sense with some people that this virus is somehow, they have to be defiant against the virus, like it's concocted to hurt them personally in some way. But I think it's very important right now to be community minded. And that means, you try to have empathy. If you are not affected by it, lucky for you and good for you. But I would say, who in your family or your friends are you willing to earmark as the person that you're willing to get sick and possibly they will die? Yeah. If you can't answer that and you're unwilling to, say, okay, my daughter, sure, why not? Because I need a haircut. Or my grandparents, because they're old. If you're unwilling to do that, then that should show perspective. It's not comfortable. Nobody wants to be in this position, but staying home helps you, your family, and everyone in the long run. And there's no way around it. There's simply no way around it. And so we all have to be uncomfortable now to get back quicker to our lives, whatever that's going to look like.
Michelle, one of the things that I want to end on, and this is the last question I'm going to ask. I've always been a guy, a glass half full guy type of guy. And I can't imagine being in the situation you are or were. But I've got to believe that there have been some instances where you have seen the good in our community and in people. What pleasantly surprised you about our community's reaction either to you or to other people during this pandemic?
Well, that's a really good question. I have good friends, but I didn't know the extent of the, if you make me cry, I'm gonna be really mad.
That's what the halftime shot's for. Don't worry about it.
The capacity to love and support. I heard from people that I haven't heard from in years. College roommates. I had people that I haven't talked to in 2 or 3 years just leave food at my door. And I think, and kind of, I will get back to that, but back to advice real quick, because I forgot to say this. If you know somebody who's sick and you want to support them, most of us do not want to ask you for anything because it puts you in peril. We don't want to ask somebody to go to the grocery store. We don't want to ask somebody to bring food, but we desperately need it, especially if we have kids and they're eating everything in the house. So I would say, if you are going somewhere, if you're already going to the store, or pretend to already be going to the store and then say, I'm going to the store, what do you need? I had people bring me flowers, order me lasagna, pizza, books.
Right.
I could just go on and on. So when people were so kind and loving and supportive through words and actions, and it means more than anyone could ever say. And so, even if it's somebody that you don't know well, every little word that you say, or every little text, or even if you drop a card off, it helps exponentially. And then I will say, I feel pain when I see pictures of people treating our health care workers so horribly. They are literally putting their lives on the line. And so when I see cities or communities, honoring them in small and big ways, I can only imagine how much that means to them. And so when I see people doing that, it's like the good, it's like the silver lining. And when I see people, organizing efforts to help groups so there is good, of course there's good, and there's the silver lining and everything. And so that is great. And it helps take away the sting of the negative that's out there.
Excellent.
Well, thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story and your experience. And again, SS COVID-19, it is a private Facebook group, but I'm pretty sure you can just search for it and find it and ask for admission. It's a great support group for people. Appreciate you coming on, Michelle. Like the pub, stick around and listen to what bullshit we have to say for the rest of the show, and jump in if you need to. I think it might be halftime, Evan. Is it halftime?
It is Superman time, my friend.
I meant to do 2 half shots to represent something, but I want to say, I think Indiana and its governor has done a pretty decent job. And
I agree.
If you know me, I didn't vote for the guy, but credit where due. The guy in Ohio, and I wish I knew the governor of Ohio's name off the top of my head.
DeWine.
Help me out.
Mike DeWine.
Thank you, DeWine.
Mike DeWine.
He was one of the first to really begin doing some things. And big shout out to New York, Andrew Cuomo, and California, Gavin Newsom, for the job they have done. Trust me, I do have an Indiana shot glass, but it would have offended Evan, and I sure as hell don't have an Ohio shot glass, and that definitely offends Evan. So cheers, big cheers to Michelle, big cheers to the place that all 3 of us normally hang out. Love you guys. You're still doing the wings, getting those out to the people at all 3 locations. Love you much. Big cheers.
Yep.
Thank you. Cheers.
Ching. There we go. Oh, man. Okay. AG, this is the B block of the show. I believe you've got it. And boy, this is a good one. So first of all, Michelle, thanks for sticking around, because you can probably definitely jump in on this.
Okay. Sure. I'm here. I'm happy to. Thanks.
I'm rocking my Angry Panda shirt because I'm getting a little angry at some things I'm seeing going on. And, I try to keep it in perspective. I try to be sympathetic to what's going on. But there's been a trend of anti-intellectualism and anti-science, anti-experts going on for quite some time. And it really seems to be manifesting itself during this time period. And I've touched on it a little bit before, but I really kind of want to dive into it a little deeper right now, because it's really counterintuitive to me. And I know a lot of people will say, hey, wait a second, the CDC may be screwed up on some of these tests, and maybe the WHO didn't give as much information early on as they could have. And there's possibly some merit to those arguments, but they are still the best we've got. And you don't chuck out your institutions and immediately turn to the least knowledgeable person in the room just because somebody made a mistake. Mistakes happen all the time. It's how you recover from those mistakes. And generally, scientists are the first to admit that they made a mistake, because scientific rigor requires that. And I certainly think it's possible to politicize organizations. I think it's probably happened to the WHO a little bit. In their defense, I think they've traded some of that, access, or I would say they've traded some of harsh scrutiny at times for access. They figure they'd rather be informed by what's going on in China than to really criticize China as harshly as they could and risk being kicked out of the country altogether. It's a tough trade-off, but to just throw them out the window really blows me away. And an analogy I'll make is, you know, there's people who are experts in their field, regardless of, you know, what it may be, you know. And if you're a mechanic and have spent 20 years being a mechanic, you'd be rightly offended if somebody was like, you know what, I don't take your word for it. I think my next door neighbor can do better or something like that. You'd be offended if somebody came along out of the blue and said, you know what, I don't think you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I know you've spent 25 years, you know, being a sales rep here, but I think I can do better. And that's what we get with a lot of these, I'll just say, conspiracy theorist sites or news organizations that basically exist to cast doubt at every turn, and themselves are politicizing it. And we see it when it happens, and I think there's a fair amount of blame to go around, but I certainly see one group doing a bit worse about it right now. But most importantly, the people who are doing the complaining about some of this, about why some of these things are happening, are really not even scrutinizing their own lives. I mean, if you're upset that certain businesses are open and your small business isn't, well, there's two reasons. One, scientifically speaking, most of these businesses probably shouldn't be open or should be, certainly be implementing much stricter rules about social distancing. Okay, Walmart can be considered essential because of how many products it sells and the fact that it's a grocery store. That's fine, it's essential, but there should really, you know, masks should be mandatory if you're going into the building. You know, put lines on the floor so people know where they're going. But if you want to know politically why Walmart and Lowe's and some of these other places are open, it's because they can lobby. They can throw money at politicians and say, make sure we're the loophole in this new bill that comes out. And, you know, you see it with, you know, I don't know if they're still open, but I'm not sure how Ruth's Chris, a multi-state corporation with, you know, millions in profits, managed to get $20 million in the small business bailout, which 20 million out of 340 seems like an awful lot for a steak restaurant that the vast majority of people who actually need a bailout can't eat at in the first place.
Exactly.
So I think people really need to take a step back and begin, you know, follow the money as always, but look about, you know, when somebody tells you they're going to do something and then they don't keep that promise, why do you continue to support that person? And that goes both ways. It absolutely goes both ways. And I can remember asking plenty of questions when the guy I voted for last time was in charge. There were plenty of things I didn't agree with and I wanted to know the answers to and didn't always get them. But right now, we've really had decades now of this anti-science, anti-expert, you know, this notion that, you spent 20 years doing something, you got to have an agenda. And that just, I think that's the exact opposite. I don't see what Dr. Anthony Fauci's agenda is other than I want to keep as many Americans safe as I possibly can.
Yes.
And his life is completely a demonstration of that. He started with AIDS and he's here now. I mean, look how long this guy's been doing this. It frustrates me. I want to know how to talk to people and help them see, because I want to just fucking shake people if I'm being honest. And say, come on, this is so basic and obvious and in front of you. And we're just, because of that, we're still not doing the simple things. And, you know, we see the people protesting. And again, I understand their plight. I understand it. But Evan, how do we get through to people?
Man, here's the deal. And I've thought about this all day. You know, when America's usually faced with something like this, when they're faced with an issue, they usually can rise above it. Take, you know, 1918, for example, Spanish flu. Okay, we've talked about that. You know, America got over it. However, 3 years or 2 years later, in 1921, in the middle of Tulsa, Oklahoma, you still had people who burned down Black people's livelihoods and their homes and killed them because they simply just didn't like them and didn't like what was happening. You look at what we're learning from this virus now, and not much has changed in America from then to now. And that's the issue that we're running into with these anti-intellectual movements, with these people who are beginning to create these videos. I mean, we saw this video about these two doctors that came out and gave a lot of just bad information. And Aaron, I know we talked about this earlier, and Michelle, in prepping for the show, we talked about this. But what is mind-blowing to me is that if we come out of this pandemic not learning that our poorest of poor people, this is what they deal with every day.
Yeah.
This is 50 days of us trying to search and trying to find, testing to make sure that, do we have it or don't we have it? This is what people in America, millions of people in America, deal with every single fucking day, and we don't do a damn thing about it. This is what minority populations put up with. And when I say minority populations, I'm talking about actually a majority women put up with every single day. People telling them what they can and can't do with their bodies. Minority populations, people of color, who live together because they have to live together in order to support each other. Healthcare is abysmal in those situations, and we've talked about that before, Aaron. But what this is bringing to light is it's bringing to light our privilege. It's bringing to light our privilege. It's bringing to light our selfishness, as Michelle mentioned before. We are not community-minded. The American dream, according to, and I thought about this all day, and I debated whether or not I'm going to say this, Aaron, and I'm sorry if our ratings drop, but the American dream is dead. It's dead because the American dream is based in the Constitution that was written by such a small percentage of a population of what America is now, that it is no longer attainable for the majority of Americans. We fight and we argue and we bicker. Instead of being community-minded, we are all about the almighty dollar. We're about us. And we're seeing it right now in the treatment of this disease. Our administration that was in charge when this disease hit, I've tried to not be very political about this, but I can't be anymore. When are we as Americans going to get to the point to say that the person that is currently leading our country is unfit to lead us through this epidemic? And the fact is, from now on, we as voters had better make sure that we put a person in that White House who, if they don't know the answer, surround themselves with people that do and trust them. Trust them to make the call, make the decisions, and say, as president, these are the people that I trust dealing with this situation. Instead of talking over them, lording over them at the pulpit, if you would, or at the podium, and making sure that you confuse the words enough to keep people on edge. That's what's happening, and that's exactly what has happened throughout American history. And we have to break that cycle now. And that's why, Michelle, it's so important for people like you to come and tell your story, because it personalizes it. Even though we may not know somebody who has it, we at least have to listen to those who do and see how it affects us as a nation and as a community and as families. So that's kind of my diatribe that I wanted to get on today. I was livid when I saw people applauding and posting these two moronic doctors that put this vitriol BS out there on the internet just to further confuse and confound. As a matter of fact, one of them, I actually popped on and just watched it a little bit because I wanted to know what I was dealing with. At the end, there was an ad for InfoWars.
Yeah, well,
InfoWars.
Yeah, this was clearly being pushed, and it's a shame because it plays into a certain aspect of confirmation bias that people want. People seek out information that already coincides with things they believe in a lot of the time. If you aren't somebody who, really is rigorous about looking at multiple views, and somebody posted something the other day that made me realize I'm nowhere near as rigorous as I need to be. Talking about research, man, that's a much more detailed thing to the scientific world than what we talk about. Research for us is, hey, I went to a few websites and checked out a few things.
I read research. That's my
right. But it's about cross-checking. It's about, I would say, when I can't quite figure out what our news media, which one of these is not quite telling the truth, that's when I start looking abroad and start looking at, hey, how are they perceiving us? Because as far as I can tell, their media doesn't have any particular, I mean, if anything, it would be anti-American in general. So if they're looking at our media outlets and rightly criticizing all of them because it's ridiculous journalism at times, but you look at them and you see, trusted sources telling you similar things that, hey, this is kind of some bullshit.
Yeah.
Personally, I take that into consideration, and I just don't think enough people do. I think this video got put out because all the information was telling people who didn't want to hear it something they didn't want to hear. And that sucks. I mean, it's something I don't want to hear, but if a doctor tells me something, my experience is to believe it. Now, if people have different personal experiences, maybe I understand that, but I've gone under the knife over 10 times for very unique surgical procedure for me. Well, not unique surgical procedure, but I've just an issue that needs to be dealt with. Nothing serious, folks. But
there's so much I want to say right now, but I won't. That's okay.
I don't fear being in a hospital. I believe these people take their oath seriously, and that we just give such little consideration to it anymore that you'd be so willing to. I mean, you watch this video, and I personally just I couldn't get that far into it because my bullshit meter went off the rails. And then when I skim through it and see other people responding to it, I feel bad for the people who so desperately want that video because they must not really be able to deal with truth. And I think we're there. It sucks. Sometimes the truth sucks.
Well, I would like to add something. I think truth and being responsible citizens is difficult. And over the years, there are many people that have gotten complacent, and they don't, we've got news coming every day. And so they find news that fits their comfort level because it's hard to go above and beyond to be informed about things. And so, there's so many ways that we could go with this that are underlying here. Part of it, I think we all need to remain vigilant in, approaching conversations. And, when I see somebody posting this information, I'm not rude about it, but I get in and I say, please don't share this. And so if we all continue to try to take responsibility and continue to have conversations, and also to, instead of, national elections are really, really important, but local elections are really, really important. And so the more we can all, keep working at bringing community together and just doing our best. I think that we're in a very, and I'm not the historian here, but this is a very unique time that is a buildup of a lot of things politically that have been going on for years. And it's an extremism. And I have to believe that we'll return to a balance, but we have to remain vigilant and just try to keep, having the conversations, like you said. Aaron.
Well, this whole thing has laid bare just the inadequacies of so many systems and institutions right now that, we have an opportunity And I'll even say it, we have an opportunity moving forward, no matter who's elected in the fall, as long as they're paying attention.
Right.
That there's an awful lot that needs to be addressed. And hopefully we have the wherewithal to do it. I believe we do. We typically have. That's what's historically made us Americans. But this is a challenge, and we need to meet it. We need to meet it in a lot of ways. Michelle, I want to ask one more question that I didn't get to earlier, and it's a two-parter. One, have you ever been tested at all? And secondly, is it two different tests? I believe it is. Is it two different tests to determine whether you currently have the virus and whether or not you've had the virus?
Yes. Yes, it's two different tests. The virus test is a swab, the one that goes way up your nose, and I've heard about that. So I do have an interesting testing story, and Evan can, chime in. So there's when you are unconfirmed but diagnosed, there's always a question mark up there. And even though I can tell you, I know I had it. But the antibodies test, which tells you if you did have it and you have built up antibodies. So I've been desperate for that to happen. And when I think it was like 3 weeks ago, or one of the labs here, and I'm not going to say the name, but it came out, yes, we're credible, we're national, and they started signing people up, and I jumped on it. And I didn't do enough research, because now I know that there are very few antibody tests that are FDA approved, and the most credible ones, the current ones now that look sort of like a pregnancy test, but they just drop the blood, they have like a 20 to 30% accuracy rate. So people are going around taking these, and they're told that they don't have it, or they do have it, and they're making life decisions based on that.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding out is that the credible, the accurate antibody tests are still in testing phases, and it involves vials of blood and it takes 3-4 days to get your reading on it. So I jumped at the antibodies test. I go, and it was they pricked my finger, they put it in this like pregnancy test thing, and I had a bad feeling about it, but I was watching it, and it spreads up just like, that litmus test or whatever on the pregnancy test. And it just kept spreading. And then everything was a light pale pink, and you couldn't really see anything. And the attendant, or whoever it was, I don't know if she was a nurse, but she was administering it. She had to get her phone flashlight out to try to read it. So that wasn't a very, I was not confident at all. And she said, oh, you're fine. You haven't had it. So then I'm like, it was a very emotionally damaging experience for me. And then a supposed nurse, I don't know, who came around the corner, and I was saying, I cannot believe it. And I'm telling them all the symptoms. And she, the supposed healthcare person, professional administering these tests, starts telling me, well, if you didn't have a fever for 5 to 7 days, then you can't possibly have had it. You had something else. You had the flu. And I was screened for the flu, by the way. And so I had then this another person of, supposed to know better, is telling me things that I know better over her. I know that you can have it without a fever. Yep. And then afterwards, after I cried and I was like, whoa, and then I talked to a lot of people who know a lot more about it than I do. And they were like, it's impossible right now to accurately know, because these tests they're not accurate. And so I regretted going, and I know that I've had it, so I'm waiting. And I've had people tell me, because again, when the antibody tests come out that are approved, they'll first test the first responders, and they have to have positive cases to compare them to know the rate. So I think that I'm looking, from what I've talked to people and heard, I think I'm probably looking at least 6 months before I could even possibly have an accurate one. And so that's another psychological, component that's traumatic, is you have to kind of realize that you may never have confirmation. You may never be part of the data or research. You may never have any really sort of standing in what your experience is. You just have to be confident and know that you know what you went through. So that's my testing story.
Wow. Wow. Well, you know, I absolutely love the fact that you're here with us, Michelle, and thank you for your time and stuff like that. And I'm inviting you to be a part of the most hallowed part of our show. And it is the Hey, Aaron segment. So tonight it's going to be Hey, Aaron and Michelle segment. Okay. So
all right.
This segment is all about me finding an interesting story about the coronavirus or COVID-19. And actually I went a different route tonight, Aaron. I went the good old Twitter route on this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read tweets by regular folk, just like the three of us. And I want to hear your guys' reaction to these tweets. Okay. So we can go back and forth, and Aaron, why don't you start us
every
out?
Other one.
Every other one. Michelle, you go after Aaron. And literally, I have not read through these, but these are the 23 relatable tweets from parents about quarantine that'll make you laugh. Here we go.
Okay, wait.
Right.
What are we supposed to do when you read it?
You're just supposed to react to it. And, react. If it's advice worthy, give some advice. Funny commentary, whatever it is. But here we go. Aaron, tweet number 1. This is from Z. Day 3 of quarantine and distance learning from home. My 6-year-old writes a biography titled "Why I Hate My Family."
I think we're going to see a lot more of that before this is over.
Michelle, here's a day 1 of quarantine. I'm going to meditate and do body weight training. Day 4, just pours the ice cream into the pasta.
I say pasta and go straight for the alcohol.
There you go. Awesome. Aaron, homeschooling day 5. Listen up, kids. It's another arts and crafts day, and we're making homemade masks out of egg cartons and toilet paper rolls again.
A completely underrated skill that those kids will be glad they know when they grow up and endure whatever the next strange quarantine stay at home for far too long experiences is of their lifetime.
Awesome. Michelle, this is from Unfiltered Please Stay Home Mama. It says, quarantine update. My son put a mask on my daughter and taught her how to rob my younger daughter's toy cash register. Laws don't matter anymore.
I say you're setting your kids up to succeed in the future.
Exactly. Those are skills that I thought they would need. Absolutely. All right, Aaron, 3-time daddy tweets, homeschooling update day 9. Today we did maths. If you have 3 kids and they're awake roughly 13 hours in the day and you're trying to work from home, how many times will you hear the word snack?
Well, the first favorite part of this is that they use the word maths, which means this is clearly England. Snack. They'll probably hear the word scone and biscuit quite often as well, and chips inappropriately as far as I'm concerned.
That's awesome. I got 2 more, one for each of you. Michelle, Unfiltered Please Stay at Home Mama tweets again. Quarantine day 11. My kids are playing outside, washing rocks from the landscaping, and one of them is naked.
I say get out the videos for future blackmail.
Yeah.
And Aaron, this might be my favorite one. It's short, sweet, but to the point. Day 13, or maybe 15 of social isolation. I've lost count. My daughter's eating pizza rolls with a spoon. Yes, a spoon.
I have been there far too recently that I care to admit, to be honest. Pizza rolls have been a staple around here.
Yes.
They're delicious.
Yes, they are.
I'm a lifelong fan of pizza rolls, and I found a wife who loves them just as much as me. So quarantine staple as far as I'm concerned. Hey, this was a great Hey Aaron session.
Yes.
I want to say first off, Michelle, big thanks for coming on. I'm sure every time telling the story just makes it a little bit more real for you, unfortunately, but also for everybody at home. Hopefully, somebody sees this and gets some support, comes to your group. Somebody sees it and takes it a little bit more seriously than maybe they did yesterday. and somebody sees it and recognizes that we need to do an awful lot more if we want to get over this anytime soon. Shout out to all our platforms, YouTube, Anchor, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the other ones I don't know about yet, and I'm doing a poor job of getting us on. But
no
no
picking
matter
up the slack, brother. Picking up the slack.
No matter what venue you or whatever medium you're listening, watching us on, hit us up. We can put you in contact with plenty of people. Ask us questions, we'll track it down. Call us names, we'll call you names back. But we love you all. We love hanging out at the pub, and we hope to be back there soon. Thank you to Evan and Michelle. Love you guys. Take care.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Love you too, bud. All right. Guys, thanks a lot. Have a good night.